Hey, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on social media democracy. I'm your host, David Ryan Polgar. I'm the founder of All Tech is Human, which is about growing the responsible tech pipeline. On our discussion about social media democracy, we're really discussing the idea that democracy is currently in peril meets the power of big tech. Really excited today to have a conversation with Professor Adam Chiara. He's a professor of communications. So, Adam, a welcome to our discussion on social media democracy.
David, thank you for having it because it's so needed right now, and it's been needed for years, right?
Yeah, and we're both sitting here in the United States. We're both Americans. Democracy is a crucial part of the American experience, and I think we've realized in recent days that it's something that doesn't happen just naturally. It's something that we have to protect and promote. But on that note, love to start off with the conversation that we've seen in the news recently with social media that Twitter has now banned Trump. This was something that a lot of advocacy groups had been arguing for the last 4 years of his administration, especially around Charlottesville and other incidents where it seemed like this was a megaphone that could potentially lead to problematic civil unrest and could also potentially spread misinformation. As we well know, misinformation informs our reality, which can be dangerous if we don't have a shared reality. It seems like democracy depends on a shared notion of reality and truth. So, Adam, what do you make of the recent actions by Twitter?
It's like I go back and forth, and here's where I struggle with it. I'm not against the platforms banning him. I'm not, right? I mean, these rules have been set up for years. He's been abusing them for years. What does concern me is that, well, so what's next? And I feel like that part is missing because, let's be fair here. I'm hearing many conservative voices saying it is censorship, and I've been pressed on it. Well, is it censorship or not? And the truth is, I don't know. But this is what I do know that I could answer is that the platforms did make a choice in this moment because the president and others have been abusing the rules for years on these platforms. So they did make a decision, right? It can't just be because inciting violence, because violence was incited on several different occasions before here. So they did make a choice to, in this moment, if we want to use the word censor or however we want to define it, maybe I'll throw that back to you in a minute, David, but
Sure.
However we want to define it, they did make a choice, right? It wasn't like, oh, they said, oh, our hands are tied. This one is the one. Like, no, this has been happening for a long time. So, I'm not against the decision to do it. And these are private companies. They're allowed to do it. But now I'm like, well, but now with, just realize you've opened up the box and now we have to make decisions on, you're going to keep seeing different posts, different content from other creators. And we're going to have to keep saying, well, why is this one and this one's not? Why is this one? And so now it's like, well, you better have a plan. And I do not feel like the platforms have a plan. What do you think about that?
Well, I've always argued that social media companies have been handed a lot of power, but they don't want this power and oftentimes struggle with this. If we look at it, social media companies are platforms that have a Silicon Valley type of mentality of scalability. But when we look at government, frankly, is the antithesis of scalability, right? It's not something where we can just extend it out. It affects a lot of people. And I say this also from my experience serving as a member on TikTok's Content Advisory Council. In that role, I receive a lot of different heated emails from individuals because the idea of deplatforming an individual is something that we should never take lightly because people oftentimes have their not only communication, but their livelihood tied to their social media platforms. But you do bring up a couple interesting points that I'd love to drill down on, Adam, is that social media companies are private companies. We might relate to them in a quasi-governmental fashion, but oftentimes when we speak about our quote unquote, in the United States, a First Amendment type of right, that's not technically how it applies. If you go back and dust off your pocket version of the Constitution that we all should be carrying around right now, as democracy is quite in peril. The First Amendment talks about what the government cannot do in terms of speech. However, this does get interesting because over time, through a lot of Supreme Court cases, they've really looked at the idea that certain private spaces can adopt a quasi kind of a quasi public square type of feeling, and this is a great example of this would be in malls. There was a fascinating case that happened after the Iraq War, where a mall, Crossgates Mall near Albany, New York, kicked out an individual who was wearing a shirt that was protesting the Iraq War. And this threw off a lot of people because they would say, well, don't I have a First Amendment right? And then specifically about protesting war is a more political oriented speech, which is typically protected. It's more central to our First Amendment and free expression types of rights. And what they found was that even though a mall was a private actor, so on one hand, they're not as restricted as a public square. So I should point out that as much as we say Twitter is a public square, it's a private company, right? We're trying to have a quote unquote public square experience inside of a private company. Problems ensue, right? But what they found in some of those cases with malls was that they can't necessarily act solely as a private actor because the expectation from the public is enhanced because we're relating to the mall as somewhat of a public square. And my personal opinion is that that's the way that private companies that are connecting all of us in a kind of public square online are going to have more responsibility towards this type of feeling. So, I mean, that kind of brings up the question of whether or not social media is a public good. So, Adam, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Do you think that platforms like Twitter and Facebook and others would be considered or should be considered a public good?
I think it should be debated. Exactly. And here's why, I know I'm hedging a little bit, but this is a conversation that we've been avoiding. When I say we mean those elected officials, right? Those that have the power to determine if it is a public good. The way I like to say it, is it a public utility? And let me make this connection here, just to piggyback on what you're saying. When we turn on the water, we expect water to come out. Right. When we use phone lines, we expect the phone lines to connect. It has become a public utility. It's become a service to us. And now when we go on social media, we expect that we'll be able to go on Facebook, connect with whomever, and say and share and say certain things. And so it's that same mentality. I think to many people, it's like my access to social media is the same as getting my water. I should just be able to turn it on. It should be there. Right. And if that's the case, then there needs to be some government oversight, just like there's some government oversight over our water supply, over our phone lines, over transportation. And so I think really the question now it boils down to is, are we at that place where these social media platforms have become a public good, a public utility? And here's where I think the social media platforms are going to have a hard time arguing this, at least the big ones. Let's look at Facebook. They bought up Instagram. They buy up WhatsApp, right? They're becoming a monopoly. So you could even say, well, I don't want to be a part of Facebook. I want to go to Instagram. Well, Instagram is owned by is owned by Facebook. And even if you wanted to, and here's my other argument with it, even if you say, and we've seen this, delete Facebook, leave Facebook. Here's what also makes it so difficult, besides the fact that you lose access to your friends, you lose access to, events, being able to easily organize to go to some event in your town, whatever it is. You also think about many of our apps, of our services are Facebook login. Right, login through Facebook. So they've created it a space where they become an integral part of our lives that are so woven in, so deeply entrenched that it's hard to now just separate it from us. And in a lot of ways, that makes me start to lean towards the side of, well, is acting more like a public utility, a public service, a public good, as you said. I do lean to that side. But then I keep coming back is I can think all I want to think, and we can feel this way. Lawmakers need to make decisions now. Right? We're at the point where we need to make a decision, because we can have this theoretical talk right now. At the end of the day, as you pointed out, the laws have pretty much determined that Facebook, Twitter are private entities. Not pretty much, they have determined right, that they are private entities, and that they have the right to make these decisions. So we can be mad about it, we can debate it, but until there's actual legislation, until there's actual court cases that determine what they are, we're just going to be shouting into the wind, right?
Well, when we look at Section 230, which you have the incoming Biden administration, which we've seen Biden on the campaign trail earlier, has been talking about this. This is the rare issue that somewhat brings together Republicans and Democrats. I will say that Republicans and Democrats generally massively disagree about why they're upset with Section 230. But it's interesting to look at when Section 230 was passed. It was part of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. Most of that act was struck down on kind of the more free expression types of rulings. In the late 90s, there was a major concern around pornography that is being spread or was being spread and continues to be. And I will say too, those tend to be exemptions to Section 230 that we should point out. There were situations such as Backpage that was leading to the exploitation of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and those are seen as ways that Section 230 would not apply in the same type of mentality. So they do crack down on that type of material. But the question, Adam, that I have for you is, I've always said that social media platforms are in between a rock and a hard place, because to moderate brings accusations around, hey, do they even have the power, or should they have the power to do this? But to not moderate leads to accusations that they are negligent in their duty. So I'd love to kind of ask you where you see this going, and then specifically as it relates to the political nature of Section 230. Love to hear your thoughts on where you think this is going.
First, there's so many moving pieces to this, as you can even just tell from our discussion. And I think it is unfair and disingenuous for us to say, well, the few people that are controlling these platforms should be able to make all the decisions, because, it is above them. And it's not a criticism to Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey. Like, these are instrumental issues, fundamental issues to our democracy. And to say to them, well, make the decisions, I just don't think that power should be held within just a few, even though they are a private company. I mean, and you even, we've talked about this, David, they're even asking in a way for regulation. I know that there's the cynical side that says because they don't want more regulation, overly regulate, they want to decide what kind of regulation. But I do think that, at least for Mark Zuckerberg, there is he's made a public recognition that, like, I need some help here. Like, I don't know what to do. Please tell me, where are my boundaries?
Well, I always jokingly say that, or maybe not jokingly, that at the end of the day, these platforms, they just want to get back to selling you ads. They don't want to deal with the messy part of what is allowable speech. I mean, if we think about the American experience of democracy, we still don't agree on free expression. So here we have platforms that a lot of them are 10 years, old around that, and we're expecting them to have the same level of kind of solidity as our struggles with hundreds of years of legal jurisprudence around arguing what is appropriate speech. But any hot takes on Section 230 and what you think the Biden administration might do in that?
I don't have any hot takes, but this is what I do think. It's like, this is the moment. This is the right time for it. Because for anything, you need public sentiment, right? That goes back to Lincoln. Lincoln said it best, right? Without public sentiment, you can't achieve anything. I just butchered the actual quote, but that was what the paraphrase, right? You need the public will. And I, like you said just a minute ago, this is one of those few issues that conservatives are mad, liberals are mad, constitutional scholars are mad, right? Populists are mad. Everybody's mad. Even the platform, even, like Zuckerberg and Dorsey, I'm sure, are mad about everything, right? Nobody knows what to do at this point. And so we are at a fever pitch right now. And so if you don't take advantage of this right now, then there's one thing I think we can all agree on: things are going to get worse. So when you say, what will the Biden administration do? I mean, this is your time that you pull in people that are libertarians, that you pull in big business, small business owners. You're a common person. You're bringing everybody in here, and you're just saying, what concerns you? What are some again, thinking future? Because a problem that we have, which makes it so difficult, is it's a moving target. We make a decision today, and then all of a sudden we see a consequence from it, and we have to try to recalibrate, and then another one, and then some new evolution in social media comes that completely changes the way we think about social media. Now we need to rethink of it, right? So that's why I think taking a long-term view. I do think that the Biden administration will take a long-term view, right? I think they're looking at this not just in who do we censor now, who do we not, but they know there are structural problems here, just based on what Biden's saying, and said we need to revisit it. He has not determined already that they're being unfair to certain politicians. He hasn't determined that they're evil. He's saying we need to revisit this because the laws, in his mind at least, do not seem to be working the way that it was intended, like you just said, from decades ago.
Yeah.
So this is the moment right now. And one concern I do have is that it's going to slip away again and become so entrenched in a political stance that we're going to just squander this moment where we actually have a fresh start. We have a moment that's a catalyst that makes us want to take some action. And before we know it, it's 4, 5, 6 years later, and nothing again has been done. So if it's not going to happen in the next 2, 3 years, I'll swing this back to you. If it doesn't happen in the next 2, 3 years after this whole buildup, after what just happened, can it happen in your mind, David? When does it?
Now's the time. I've done a decent amount of kind of media over the years around the impact of social media and how we can improve it. And I will say that until recently, I would always bring up Section 230, and most every journalist would say, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, this massively influences it, and this is the kind of underpinnings of what we're doing." I also point out that there has been a major shift in how we're approaching social media, because if you look at the growth of the web and then the growth of social media in particular, right after the passage of Section 230, the Communications Decency Act in 1996, you had the well-known manifesto, the cyberspace manifesto by the one of the founders of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, that is an advocacy group really on more of a libertarian bent for it. And if you go back and read that, it's very interesting, because the viewpoint, which was embedded in Silicon Valley, was that the web is a hands-off place, that governments and laws don't apply, right? So there has been a major shift that now when we're looking at social media, we're viewing it as more of a function of government. Even like I said, when we relate to Facebook or Twitter offending our free speech, when in fact, legally, at least now, and we should argue maybe this is what needs to change, but legally, it's actually Twitter that has a First Amendment right. We might remember Mitt Romney a couple of years ago talking about how corporations have free speech, right? They're people under our law, which means that Twitter is actually a person, legally speaking, and has a First Amendment right. But there's so much we could talk about, Adam, about this, but unfortunately, we should wrap it up. But I think we'll have to come back and explore this, because, as you mentioned, a multitude of fascinating but thorny and hotly debated topics. So, Adam, for everybody watching, I'd love to have them kind of connect with you. Where can people follow you or stay in touch with your work online?
Of course, ironically, through social media, and it could be on Twitter at Adam Chiara. You can also go to my website, and it's adamchiara.com. And I know we have to wrap this up, David, so I'll just say this one last piece here is, I think this conversation is just such a great example of it. We've spent about 20 minutes discussing it, and I feel like we're not even in the first chapter. We finished the first chapter of this story. There's so much to this, and that's what makes it so complicated for people. So, thanks again for having this conversation, because I think we need more of these, just to start to have our minds wrap around what big of a problem this is, and if we don't solve it, what serious consequences, what dire consequences it could lead to.
That's why we're running with the title Social Media Democracy. My own personal opinion is we are entering the politics of technology. It's not just about the technical side, but it's about how does this incorporate in our society, and how do we limit the unintended consequences of tech, and how do we build a better tech future? So, Adam, really appreciate you being here for this discussion for Social Media Democracy. My name is David Ryan Polgar. You can stay in touch with me at davidryanpolgar.com. I run the organization All Tech is Human. You can stay in touch with All Tech is Human at alltechishuman.org, and find me on Twitter at techethicist. All right. So, Adam, Again, thank you for this conversation, and everybody else, please participate because this is important. This is determining our future. We want to have the future that we want. It's not just going to magically happen. And these aren't issues that we can just hit a button and fix it. This is going to take a struggle. It's going to take a debate. It's going to take hard work. So again, Professor Adam Chiara, thank you for this conversation about social media democracy.
Thank you, David.